At a certain point in your life, something very strange begins to happen. People start responding to you differently, even though you haven't changed anything obvious. You're not trying harder. You're not dressing louder. You're not saying more. And yet, rooms seem to orient around you in subtle ways. Conversations linger. Eye contact stretches half a second longer than before. You feel it most clearly in moments that are quiet and unannounced, when someone leans in without knowing why, or when a simple presence suddenly carries a charge. You might think this means you finally learned how to be attractive, but that's not what's happening at all. In fact, what's unfolding is almost the opposite. Something old has fallen away, and something far more unsettling has taken its place. At first, it confuses you. You don't feel more sexual on the inside. If anything, you feel calmer, less needy, less driven by the hunger that once pushed you forward. The old urgency has thinned out. The constant reaching, proving, signaling has softened into something quieter. And yet this is precisely when the attention begins. Not loud attention, not performative desire, but a gravity that draws people toward you without asking your permission. Here's the part nobody tells you. Sexual magnetism is rarely about sex. It's about containment. It's about what happens when a person no longer leaks themselves into the world in search of completion. Think of the version of you from years ago. The one who wanted to be wanted. The one who scanned rooms for approval, who adjusted tone and posture, who laughed a fraction too quickly or explained a fraction too much. That version believed attraction was something you generated by effort. And so effort became the signal. Desire in that stage was loud, restless, and externally directed. But something happened along the way. Not all at once, not dramatically. It happened through disappointments, through disillusionment, through the slow erosion of identities that once promised fulfillment and didn't deliver. Maybe it happened at dinner tables where the conversations felt hollow. Maybe it happened late at night, scrolling past images that once stirred you and now felt strangely flat. Maybe it happened in relationships where you were seen but not met, touched but not recognized. And so you began to withdraw, not in bitterness, but in discernment. You stopped chasing experiences that no longer nourished you. You stopped narrating yourself so aggressively. You stopped needing to be mirrored every second to feel real. This withdrawal wasn't a retreat from life, it was a return to center. Now, here's the strange part. As you pulled your energy back home, it didn't disappear. It condensed. Condensed energy behaves differently. It stops broadcasting and starts resonating. And resonance is far more compelling than noise. You can see this in small, almost embarrassing moments. You're standing in line somewhere, not thinking about anyone at all, and someone strikes up a conversation that feels oddly intimate for its setting. Or you're listening rather than speaking, and the person across from you begins revealing things they didn't plan to say. Or you're simply present, unguarded, unperforming, and you notice a shift in the air that wasn't there before. You might wonder if this makes you manipulative. If you're somehow doing something to people without their consent, that worry itself is a sign you've crossed into a different territory. Because this magnetism isn't about control. It's about coherence. People are responding to the fact that you are no longer fragmented. Most attraction is a negotiation. I will show you this if you show me that. I will desire you if you desire me first. I will lean in as long as you reassure me. I won't fall. But when someone becomes internally integrated, that negotiation collapses. There's nothing being asked for, nothing being withheld. And that absence of agenda is deeply disarming. Let me give you an image for this. Imagine two rooms. One is cluttered with mirrors, each reflecting a slightly different version of the same person, all competing for attention. The other is empty, still, and well lit. When you walk past the first room, you notice the chaos. When you walk past the second, you stop. Not because it's demanding anything from you, but because it has space. This is where spiritually advanced people often find themselves without meaning to. Not advanced in the sense of being better than anyone else. This isn't about hierarchy. It's about having shed a layer of internal noise that most people are still living inside. You haven't transcended desire. You've clarified it. And clarity is rare. Of course, part of you might think, why does this express itself sexually? Why not just as respect, or calm, or neutrality? The answer is uncomfortable but precise. Sexuality is where presence becomes most obvious. It's where people are least able to fake, least able to intellectualize, least able to hide from what they feel in their bodies. When you are grounded, when you are not reaching, When your sense of self is not up for negotiation, people feel it viscerally. Some experience it as safety, others as curiosity, others as desire, still others as irritation or unease. But no one experiences it as nothing. And this is where the confusion deepens, because you didn't set out to become magnetic. In fact, you may have set out to become less entangled, less driven by impulse, less identified with being wanted. And yet, here you are, carrying a signal that seems to draw exactly the kind of attention you once chased. This doesn't mean you've regressed. It means you've crossed a threshold. I can tell you from watching countless people move through this stage, the magnetism appears precisely when the hunger dissolves. It's the paradox that makes this phase so destabilizing. You no longer want what you're suddenly offered, and the world doesn't know how to categorize someone like that. At this point, you may be thinking that this all sounds flattering, or even dangerous to believe. You might worry that seeing yourself this way will inflate your ego, make you feel superior, set you apart. But notice something important. True magnetism doesn't make you feel larger. It makes you feel quieter. It doesn't shout, "Look at me." It whispers, "I am here." And yet, beneath that quiet, something undeniably alive is stirring. Not the frantic aliveness of craving, but the steady heat of something integrated, something whole, something that no longer needs to convince. This is only the beginning of the story. Because magnetism, when misunderstood, can become a trap. And what draws people toward you now will soon ask something from you in return. At first, this new attention feels almost abstract, like a rumor you're hearing about yourself from another room. You notice it without fully claiming it. You tell yourself you're imagining things. You tell yourself people are just being friendly. You tell yourself it doesn't mean anything. And in a way, you're right. It doesn't mean what it usually means. But it does mean something has shifted, and you are now living between two worlds. In one world, the old rules still apply. Desire is transactional. Attraction is effortful. Power comes from being needed. In that world, people chase and retreat, signal and withhold, inflate and diminish themselves in a constant dance of insecurity. You know this world intimately. You lived there for years. You learned its language. You survived by adapting to its rhythms. In the other world, something quieter is operating. Desire doesn't announce itself. It gathers. It doesn't need to prove. It doesn't rush. And when people encounter it, they often don't have words for what they're responding to. They just feel more awake around you, or more exposed, or strangely seen. This is where the double life begins. Outwardly, nothing dramatic has changed. You still go to work. You still attend gatherings. You still sit at tables where conversations skim the surface. But inwardly, you are no longer playing the same game. You're not auditioning. You're not optimizing. You're not scanning every interaction for signs of approval or rejection. You're simply there. And presence, when it's unguarded, reorganizes desire. You might notice it in social settings first. Someone laughs a little too hard at something you say, even when it wasn't particularly funny. Someone finds a reason to stand closer than necessary. Someone keeps returning to you in conversation, as if orbiting a gravity they don't quite understand. Others may grow awkward, restless, or defensive, as if your stillness is somehow accusing them of something they haven't done. Some people will be drawn toward you without knowing why. Others will test you, flirt without committing, circle without entering. Still others will keep their distance, sensing that whatever is happening around you requires a level of honesty they're not ready for. None of this is personal. It's structural. Now, here's where it becomes dangerous. When you live between these two worlds, it's easy to misinterpret what's happening. Part of you might wonder if this magnetism is something to use. Another part might want to shut it down entirely, to become invisible again, to avoid the complications it brings. And still another part might quietly fear that this attention is a trap, a regression into old patterns you worked hard to outgrow. All of these reactions make sense. You might say, if I've really grown, why does this look so similar to the dynamics I left behind? Or, if I'm less identified with sex and desire, why is it showing up more now? Or even, does this mean I'm unconsciously manipulating people? But look a little closer. What's different now is not the presence of desire, but the absence of grasping. You are no longer trying to extract something from others. And paradoxically, that makes people feel free to want you. Desire that is unentangled feels safe. Desire that isn't hungry doesn't threaten. Desire that doesn't need to be fed allows others to approach without fear of being consumed. This is why the magnetism you're experiencing feels softer, stranger, and more ambiguous than before. It doesn't push, it invites. And invitations are unsettling for people who are used to coercion, even subtle coercion. There is also a loneliness woven into this stage that rarely gets named. Because while more people may be drawn to you, fewer can actually meet you. They may feel something, but not know how to stay present with it. They may project fantasies onto you, or turn you into a symbol, or imagine you hold something they're missing. But projection is not connection. Attention is not intimacy. So you find yourself in a peculiar position, seen but not known, desired but not met, surrounded yet strangely alone. You might be lying awake at night, replaying interactions that felt charged but unresolved, wondering why nothing seems to land. Or you might be sitting across from someone who is clearly attracted to you, and feel a quiet sadness because you can sense the gap between what they want and who you are. Or you might notice yourself pulling back, not out of fear, but out of clarity, because something in you refuses to enter dynamics that rely on confusion. At this point, you may be thinking, wouldn't it be easier to just go back? To be less present, less grounded, less whatever this is? To trade this strange magnetism for the familiar comfort of being one of many, rather than a question mark in the room. But here's the quiet truth hidden underneath all of this. You can't go back because you're no longer fragmented enough to belong to the old structures. The very thing that makes you magnetic now is the same thing that makes certain connections impossible. This doesn't make you superior. It makes you incompatible with relationships that require you to abandon yourself. There's also a subtle temptation here, one that doesn't look like ego at first. It looks like restraint, like spiritual maturity. You might start distancing yourself from desire altogether, treating it as something beneath you, something to be transcended. But that's just another form of splitting. Another way of rejecting a part of life that is asking to be integrated, not eliminated. Sexual magnetism at this stage isn't about indulging desire or suppressing it. It's about holding it without collapsing into it. Letting it exist without turning it into identity, currency, or proof. If you observe your own life carefully, you'll notice that the moments of strongest magnetism are also the moments when you are most yourself and least self-conscious. When you're listening rather than performing. When you're grounded rather than reaching. When you're open without being porous. This is why people feel something around you but can't always name it. You're not offering them a role to play. You're offering them a mirror. And mirrors make people uncomfortable. As this continues, life will begin to rearrange itself. Not loudly, not all at once, but through small shifts. Certain invitations will fade, certain dynamics will dissolve. Certain people will drift away, not because of conflict, but because the frequency no longer matches. And others, fewer but more precise, will begin to appear. Before that happens, though, there is a narrowing. A thinning, a period where the magnetism remains but the fulfillment does not, where desire circles but doesn't land, where you are asked to stay with yourself without rushing to resolve the tension. And this is the point where most people either misuse their magnetism or learn what it's actually for. This is where the story turns inward, where what looked like a gift begins to feel like a weight, because magnetism, when it isn't grounded in recognition, can become a form of exile. The attention continues, but the nourishment doesn't. You feel the pull of others, but not the meeting. Desire moves toward you, but stops short of truth. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a kind of quiet fatigue sets in. Not the fatigue of being unwanted, but the fatigue of being wanted in ways that don't reach you. There are moments when this lands sharply. A conversation that crackles with tension, but never deepens. A glance that promises intimacy, but dissolves into avoidance. A message that flirts with closeness and then retreats into vagueness. You begin to notice a pattern. People are drawn to your presence, but many are afraid of what it asks of them. Because what you're carrying now isn't just attraction. It's clarity. And clarity has a cost. It means you can no longer pretend not to see the mechanics underneath desire. You can feel when someone wants to be chosen rather than known. When they're seeking validation rather than communion. When they're reaching for you as an answer rather than approaching you as a question. Once you see this, it's impossible to unsee. So you start declining things without drama. You stop stepping into spaces that once fed your ego but now drain your integrity. This is often when the loneliness intensifies. Not the dramatic loneliness of being abandoned, but the quiet loneliness of standing in a room full of people and realizing that very few are actually available. You might be at a gathering, listening to laughter ripple around you, and feel a strange sense of distance, as if you're slightly out of phase with the moment. You're not above it. You're just not inside it in the same way anymore. At night, this can feel especially stark. You lie in bed not aching for a body but for resonance, not craving touch but contact that doesn't require you to shrink or inflate yourself. The old fantasies don't work anymore. The old distractions fall flat. And what remains is a raw, unbuffered awareness of your own aliveness. This is the part many people don't talk about. The dark night that sits behind spiritual magnetism. The restraint it demands. The discipline of not using desire to fill the spaces you've cleared. At this point, you may wonder if you've gone too far. If you've overcorrected. If in letting go of need, you've let go of joy itself. You might think, maybe I'm just emotionally numb. Maybe I've dissociated. Maybe this whole thing is a mistake. But numbness feels dead. What you're feeling is alive. Intensely alive, just not noisy. There's a difference between desire as compulsion and desire as signal. Compulsion says, I need this to feel whole. Signal says, something in me recognizes something in you. One consumes. The other reveals. Right now, you are learning to live without collapsing into either extreme, without chasing desire, without rejecting it, without turning it into identity, without pretending it doesn't matter. This is a narrow path, and it's why this stage feels so precarious. Some people, when they reach this point, turn their magnetism into a weapon. They enjoy the pull, the influence, the subtle power of being wanted. They let it feed parts of themselves that were once starved. Others go the opposite direction and try to shut everything down, numbing themselves to avoid the complexity altogether. And still others oscillate between the two, unsure where they stand, exhausted by the tension. But there is another way through this, and it begins with a difficult realization. Sexual magnetism is not asking you to act, it's asking you to hold. To hold your own energy without leaking it into fantasy or performance, to hold others' projections without internalizing them, to hold the discomfort of being seen without immediately trying to resolve it through connection. This is not passive. It requires tremendous inner strength. Think of it this way. You are no longer a door swinging open and shut with every passing breeze. You are becoming a room with walls. Not walls that isolate, but walls that allow something real to take shape inside. And yes, this means fewer people can enter. But those who do will do so with intention. You may notice that as you stop engaging with half-formed dynamics, the magnetism sharpens rather than fades. This can be unsettling. You might have hoped that restraint would quiet the attention, make things simpler. Instead, it refines the signal. It separates curiosity from readiness, interest from capacity. At this point, part of you may worry about becoming cold, distant, or untouchable. You might think that by not responding, you're denying life something essential. But withdrawal is not the same as refusal. Discernment is not the same as rejection. You're not saying no to desire, you're saying no to distortion. And distortion is what happens when desire is used to escape oneself rather than encounter another. I've seen this stage unfold many times. It often feels like standing in a hallway between rooms, with doors closing behind you and none yet open ahead. The old ways of relating no longer fit. The new ones haven't fully arrived. And the temptation to force something, anything, just to end the waiting can be strong. But this hallway is not a mistake. It's an initiation. It's teaching you that magnetism without grounding is chaos, and grounding without openness is sterility. What's being forged here is the capacity to hold both at once. Soon, something will begin to change. Not because you decide it should, but because the internal alignment you've been cultivating reaches a kind of critical mass. The quality of attention you receive will shift. The type of people who approach you will change. And the very thing that once felt like a burden will begin to feel precise. Before that happens, though, you are asked to stay here, to not rush the resolution, to trust that what feels like absence is actually refinement. Because what's coming next is not more desire. It's recognition. Recognition arrives quietly, not with fireworks, not with certainty. It arrives the way morning does, slowly enough that you don't notice the exact moment night ended. At first, it looks like subtraction rather than addition. Fewer interactions, fewer charged exchanges that go nowhere, fewer moments of almost. And in that thinning, something unexpected happens. Your system relaxes, not because you've become indifferent, but because you're no longer constantly bracing against misalignment. Then, one day, there's a different kind of encounter. It doesn't announce itself as important. There's no dramatic pull, no destabilizing rush. Instead, there's a strange sense of familiarity, as if you've stepped into a room where the air pressure finally matches your lungs. Conversation doesn't perform. Silence doesn't strain. Desire doesn't spike, it settles. This is the moment most people miss because it doesn't look like what they were taught to want. Recognition doesn't grab you. It meets you. You'll notice it in the body first. There's no need to impress, no need to guard, no subtle contraction in the chest, no background calculation about how you're being perceived. You're not more confident. You're less concerned. And the person across from you feels it too. They're not trying to extract something from you. They're not asking you to complete them. They're present. This is where sexual magnetism finally reveals its purpose. It was never meant to generate endless desire. It was meant to filter, to clear the field, to burn away dynamics built on hunger, confusion, and projection until only resonance remained. At this stage, desire changes texture. It becomes slower, deeper, more embodied. It's no longer about intensity, but intimacy. Not the intimacy of exposure, but the intimacy of steadiness. Of two people who can stay. Now, you might think this sounds idealized, rare, unrealistic. And in a sense it is rare, not because it's unattainable, but because most people abandon themselves before they reach it. They trade clarity for comfort. They use desire to anesthetize loneliness rather than walk through it. You didn't. And that's the quiet difference that matters. This doesn't make you purer. It doesn't make you superior. It doesn't place you above anyone else. It simply means your path required a different initiation. You had to learn how to hold your own energy without spilling it everywhere. You had to sit in rooms where you were felt but not met. You had to endure the misunderstanding of being desired for the wrong reasons without letting it harden you. Most people never learn that kind of patience. And so when recognition finally arrives, it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like relief. Relief from performing. Relief from explaining. Relief from being pulled into dynamics that require you to fragment yourself just to belong. You realize that what you were guarding wasn't your heart. It was your coherence. This is also where the final misunderstanding dissolved. Sexual magnetism was never about being wanted by many. It was about being available to the right kind of meeting. The kind where desire doesn't ask you to become someone else. The kind where attraction doesn't destabilize your center. The kind where presence is enough. If you look back now, you'll see the pattern more clearly. The way old pleasures lost their shine. The way certain relationships quietly fell apart. The way attention increased even as your interest decreased. None of that was random. It was a reorganization. You were being trained to recognize the difference between attention and attunement, between chemistry and capacity, between being desired and being met. And here's the final turn of the story. Once you embody this, once magnetism and grounding are no longer at odds inside you, something else happens. You stop thinking about yourself as magnetic at all. The concept becomes irrelevant. You're not managing your energy, you're living it. Attraction becomes a byproduct, not a project. People who are still operating from hunger may continue to feel something around you. That won't change, but it won't confuse you anymore. You won't feel responsible for it. You won't feel flattered or threatened. You'll simply see it for what it is, a response to coherence in a fragmented world. And when recognition appears, you'll know not because it overwhelms you, but because it doesn't. It will feel steady, mutual, unforced. You'll notice that you're not trying to hold back or lean in. You're just there, and so are they. This is the identity that emerges at the end of this journey. Not someone who mastered attraction, not someone who transcended desire, but someone who can walk inside desire without losing themselves. Someone whose presence is grounded enough to be felt and integrated enough to be safe. Someone who understands that magnetism is not a tool but a signal. A signal that you stop chasing completion outside yourself. A signal that you endured the narrowing without panicking. a signal that you trusted the quiet refinement when nothing seemed to be happening. You didn't become sexually magnetic because you tried to be. You became magnetic because you became whole. And when wholeness enters a room, desire doesn't shout. It recognizes itself and gets very, very quiet.